Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and here's me posting about metal, specifically PostMetal, hitting you guys with another starter pack, a bunch of artists and records from within a certain genre or music niche, maybe one that you're not that well familiar with, and we will kick you off with some good solid recommendations in that style, in that sound, to get you hopefully diving into things a little bit further. Like I have in recent videos where I have done exactly this, I am bringing on a guest to hand over some recommendations as well. In this instance, that is none other than Ebony, aka Metal and Coffee, who we had before on the main channel doing a review. And yeah, she came by once again to give us some post-metal recommendations as well on this channel right here, over here, that you're watching right now. She picked 3 records, I picked 3 records. We are going to go over each of them and talk about why we chose them and why we think they are good representations of the post-metal genre, why you should check them out. And without any further ado, here is the conversation. Let's go. Okay, we're here and ready to do those recommendations. It's me, it's Metal and Coffee. Before we rip into the first record, which people can see on the screen now between us, I wanted to ask you off the bat, because, you know, I sort of allowed you to choose the direction that we were going to go in with this video, and wanted to know what kind of drove you to post-metal, first off, and then from there, because it is like such an all-encompassing genre that can potentially bring in a lot of elements, what makes kind of a post-metal album for you as like a fan of the genre?
Well, first off, post-metal is actually one of my gateway drugs into metal. I started out in college as a big post-rock fan. Mogwai,
Nice.
Caspian, Goddess and National.
Hell yeah. Mogwai. Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Explosions in the Sky.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
You're
You
talking
know.
my fucking, you're talking my fucking language. You're talking my fucking language.
I see you.
You're talking my language. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Okay.
So basically, after kind of experiencing the beauty, the amazingness in just post-rock and how much it invokes your feelings and how literally you can probably just get emotional and just cry your eyes out to some, I decided to check out some post-metal after already being a metalhead to begin with. I was super into Opeth. I was really into the Damnation album of Opeth, which is their most their non-metal album, basically.
Right.
And so in order to see if I wanted to branch out into more metal, I discovered post-metal, and that's where ISIS came in. And as many, well, actually, I'm not going to say that. You might not know that. But Aaron Turner of ISIS is a big pioneer of the genre. Along with people from Neurosis and Godflesh and Jesu. I think that's how you pronounce it.
I say Yesu. I think people say it a couple different ways. It's fine.
And so basically, it was that moment where I figured out, oh, you can balance calm with chaos.
Sure.
And it could be a really beautiful thing. And like you were mentioning earlier, post-metal is expansive. No band sounds the same because literally it's all about expanding the boundaries of extreme music and finding whatever you define as stillness and atmosphere and emotion, however you define that, and balancing that with stillness. So that's basically what I would define post-metal. It's actually what it means to me, and that's like my number one subgenre of metal, honestly.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah.
All right. Well, as you kind of alluded to earlier, big, massive pioneer and influence on the genre, Aaron Turner, his most well-known band, ISIS, and you decided off the bat when I asked you for your recommendations, to hit me with this record, which, I mean, is pretty much like the granddaddy of all post-metal. You picked the big one. You were like, I'm going for it. I'm not going to shy away. I'm going to pick the post-metal album of all post-metal albums, ISIS's Panopticon. And, so I figured you must have a lot to say about it. What do you feel like makes this a post-metal album? What do you feel like makes this a great post-metal album, and, you know, maybe most importantly, like a good introduction to the genre for somebody who's just like trying to get a grasp of it and try something new?
Gosh, there's so many thoughts I have. So in terms of the album itself, Panopticon, it is actually the band's first step into embracing a lot of ambient sounds and a lot of general post-rock vibes, because earlier ISIS, there wasn't really that much variation in terms of experimenting with those soundscapes and synths and just long lulls in music. And so with Panopticon, they pretty much started the post-metal subgenre with this record and started making people think about music differently and breaking away from the typical song structure of song-verse. There is no structure to any of these songs. It's literally however they decide. If they want to have a long part where they're just whamming on instruments and it's distortion for like 3 minutes, they do that. If they want to have a lonely guitar for like 5 minutes, they do that too. a lot of open spaces, a lot of tension building, a lot of instrumental passages too. But usually there is usually a payoff involved at some point. Like it does go somewhere. There is a direction. Yeah, there's a lot of crescendos in post-metal, of course, and also in post-rock.
Just like post-rock.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like in a metal context. You know? In
a metal context. And so yeah, for me personally, this is what made me realize that metal is not just screaming into the mic, fast picking and whamming on blast beats. That's not only what metal could be.
Right.
I realized that metal could be very, very beautiful if you are into that, you know, kind of expansion of your mind and self-reflection, and you're willing to kind of just sit there and let the music embrace you.
Yeah. I mean, I think like as we were, you know, as you mentioned and I mentioned and noted, you know, there's a lot of diversity in the world of post-metal, but I think like one of the major common threads that links all of it together is that you have a lot of like long, dramatic, meditative, almost like song structures and progressions that really like kind of in parts will put you into a bit of a lull, but like eventually will kind of like bring you to that place of like total bliss and, you know, like emotional overwhelming, but whatever the hell you want to say, because it really does like kind of, you know, build to that epic place. And I feel like, you know, ISIS is the band with this record that like really laid out the blueprint for that, because like it does that. It does it very simply. It does it without too much in the way of any like crazy weird genre combinations. It's just very straightforward. Yeah. You know, in a way, they're almost reminiscent of Mogwai, who you mentioned earlier, but like again with a lot more clear metal influence in the guitar tones and the riff style and so on and so forth. So
yeah.
No, I mean obviously good and very strong pick at the start of this. All right, so next I'm going to throw down on one, and that's going to be the Boris album Feedbacker. You know, as far as their like 2000s output, this is something that, you know, is still pretty early on in the decade, still pretty early on in their career. Boris is one of those metal bands that like, no 2 or 3 albums sound all that much the same. Yeah. They're such a diverse and such a versatile band. They've really kind of tried almost every type of metal across their career at some point, and even have made records that are like more pop centric here and there. They're a wild band, and you know, again, like kind of diving throughout their catalog is you know, really gratifying experience. And, you know, Feedbacker is probably the most prominent record in their catalog that you could say in a way is like a contribution to the post-metal style. I mean, in this era of their career, they were still like really big into drones and noise and so on and so forth. And then that most definitely is laced into this record too. But you have a lot of like heavier metal passages, and you have, especially on like, you know, part 2 of Feedbacker, a lot of like super dramatic spaced out guitars and guitar chord passages that almost sound like they could be on a Godspeed record. To me, what Boris was doing on this record is not only, again, kind of like, engaging fully and intensely in their drone shit, but also on top of it, like, paying a little bit of homage to some of the prevailing sounds and trends in post-rock at the time. And what's more post-metal than that? Because obviously, they're kind of like applying some of those ideas, some of those linear structures, some of those epic and very layered builds in a metal context that works specifically for them, being the kind of like drone metal outsiders that they were at the time when they made this record. So that's essentially why I chose this album. I would say, as far as like post-metal goes, if you're looking for something that is more of like a purist listen, that ISIS record is more going to fit the bill. This is more of like a bunch of things, but there's like, definitely some clear post-metal, what you could categorize as that, in the mix here and there, on a couple of the, pieces. And I think like kind of another defining characteristic is that the record is literally like 5 tracks, all of them are feedback, or 1, 2, 3. It's like, it's another kind of defining characteristic. A lot of these post-metal and post-rock bands is like they structure their albums out like they're classical pieces,
compositions.
And it's like it's not just a bunch of random song titles. This is a movement 1, movement 2. You know what I mean? That's like that's kind of how it works. You're almost like taking an orchestral approach to the way that you're kind of building up the sounds and structuring out the tracks. And Boris most definitely checks all of those boxes on Feedbacker, which is why I went with this one. Before we move on to your next pick, do you have any general thoughts on Boris? Like, have you messed with them much as a band in the past?
I mean, I've seen them a couple times, which is like very, very, it's just all smoke, basically.
Oh, of course.
You barely see them, but
Of course. Of course.
But absolutely love Boris. I do not think I actually listened to that album.
They have a huge discography.
Yeah.
I haven't even heard every Boris record,
I think
honestly.
the last one I really like was Heavy Rocks.
Yeah.
And that was, I think it was more their poppy side.
But was that the second Heavy Rocks? Because they have 2 Heavy Rocks, I believe, minimum in their catalog. They may even have a few.
Are they both like pink?
There's a pink one. There's an orange one. There's like a purple one and orange one. There's actually a third one that has like a leopard print. Okay.
And
the thing is, they're all kind of like going for the same vibe. So it's funny that you bring that up, because that's actually one of the few exceptions in their catalog where they're like, we're actually going to go back and do a thing that we had success doing in the past. And it's so funny because like they don't even have like the decency to name it Heavy Rocks 1, 2, or 3. It's like, we're naming all these shits the same shit. We're not even going to tell. You're just going to tell by the cover.
You can do that. You're Boris.
Just like, it's so Weezer of them, Weezer of them to go about it that way. But yeah, Heavy Rocks is definitely like a really cool series in their catalog, which, again, is another avenue that you could go down with the Boris flowchart in terms of like what avenue of their sound, which, that is so much more like sludge metal and like, heavy metal and stuff like that on those records that you could potentially go down with their catalog. All right. Next on the list, another recommendation that you brought to the table is Cult of Luna's Somewhere Along the Highway, which came out in 2006. What made you go with this record as far as like a strong introduction to post-rock?
So this one is probably in my top 5 albums ever.
Wow.
And I rate it really, really high because the instrumentation on this record is probably one of the most amazing you'll ever hear from any post-metal band. And I know we established earlier that post-metal encompasses a lot of stuff. And so I'm going to say outright, ISIS, not comparable to Cult of Luna. They're both different kinds of post-metal. ISIS is more raw in production, and it's almost like they record their stuff in one take. It's very, very instrumentation focused. Cult of Luna, you are getting a very ethereal experience with every track on this record. They make great use of synths that create this really dark and gloomy atmosphere. It's also one of those records that's only like 6 songs long.
Yeah.
There. And I forgot another post-metal a post-metal thing, all the songs are like over like 8 minutes. Some are like 25 minutes.
Right.
That's, you got to be locked in.
Right. You got to be locked in. How long does this album last in total?
It's an hour and 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. Not the longest post-metal.
Right. Or the longest post-rock album.
Right.
But I mean, like 5 or 6 tracks spread across an hour sounds about right.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So you really got to be locked in. But I will say this album is an amazing start to Cult of Luna if you're interested in post-metal in general, because this is one of the few albums I'll put on start to finish. The hour and 5 minutes goes so fast. I'm completely locked into the journey, and the vocals are just so gargly and grimy. So there are vocals in this record. They balance it out with moments of calm, and then when things crescendo up, it gets really gargly and grimy, and all the darkness is coming out of the vocalist's soul. And so, yeah, I would really put this not only under post-metal. It's also their prog metal band as well, because they do really well at taking you on a journey and really making you feel like crap. Because that's really what these albums are so dark.
Instead of bringing you to a place where it's like inspiring and high and epic, like on a normal post-rock album or some post-rock albums, they're taking you down to the worst place.
Yeah, I mean,
they're intensifying negative feelings.
The only exception possibly is Alcest. They make happy metal.
Yeah.
But Cult of Luna and their themes tend to be extremely dim. The last song on the album is Dark City Dead Man, and it's 15 minutes long. And when I tell you that 15 minutes has me in my feelings and it goes so fast, I just highly recommend it. I think you should experience its dreadfulness.
And what you said in terms of like the instrumentation and, to kind of compare it with a record that's more blunt and direct, like the ISIS album earlier.
Yeah.
Like, we're not just talking about just a regular guitar, drums, sound palette here. There's also the synths. And is there anything else sort of being added on top of that to sort of like sweeten the deal as well?
I think it's mostly the way they produce the album.
Okay. There's just a lot of atmosphere and a lot of...
Yeah, a lot of ambience, a lot of atmosphere, and a lot of really... I wouldn't say super clean production. It is clean though. It's not something where you can actually hear the movements of the drums and the reverb and all that stuff. But it's just super clean, and it comes off as very well crafted.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to throw down on the next one. That is going to be Kayo Dot's Choirs of the Eye, the group's 2003 record, though the band is and kind of has always been masterminded by the one and only singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, guy who has fronted many different left field and avant-garde metal projects and bands throughout the years, Mr. Toby Driver. It's cool and interesting that earlier that you mentioned with Cult of Luna, sort of the band's kind of like parallels to prog rock and prog metal, because that is the case very much for a lot of different post-metal bands, because I feel like when you are a group dealing in such long song structures, especially in the metal world, like the likelihood that you're probably also going to be massively influenced by progressive rock to some degree is like going to be high. I feel like that's it almost comes like hand in hand to a degree. And that's most definitely the case. Also for the Boris album I mentioned earlier, some like the dramatic guitar bits are almost like Pink Floyd reminiscent here and there. And I would say like those influences are even clearer and in a lot of cases more modern on this Toby Driver record as well. Like, for sure you could pick up some elements of like, post-rock with the epic and dramatic builds and the lengthy songs throughout this record. But also like, I think out of the bunch of all the albums that we've recommended here, this one's probably like one of the more instrumentally intricate and showy. If you're like really looking for something that is going to layer on the instrumentation and be a little avant-garde and be a little out there, because I mean, this also comes off of John Zorn's Zadok label. So I mean, obviously anything that comes out on that label is going to reach a certain standard of like It's got to be fucking weird. It's got to be pretentious. It's got to be progressive, and it's got to be, you know, sort of like super heady to some degree. And that is most definitely the case for this album. But again, you know, I would say in comparison, the ISIS record is a lot more straightforward. This is also kind of dealing and dabbling in a lot of that, but in a way that is a bit more avant-garde, a bit more experimental. You know, somebody who is very into like the New York weirdo scene, bands like Naked City and stuff like that are going to find things to like in this album, while again, it still fits pretty snugly into the whole post-metal deal. But yeah, you know, that's my next recommendation for the list. We have a couple more over here. We have Amenra's 6, which you brought to the table. This is the newest and most contemporary of all of the records that you've brought up. This dropped in 2017. What made you add this to the list? And with it being as recent as it is there anything about it that sort of sets it apart from a lot of these records that came out more in the 2000s when the genre was kind of like really getting more of its like footing?
That is actually a very, very interesting question. So this Amenra record, I actually perceive this as a nice in-between between ISIS and Cult of Luna, because you're getting kind of the rawness of the production, but at the same time, you're getting the intricacies in atmosphere and just overall really strong ambience. And the reason why I chose this record was because this is the record that actually turned me on to Amenra. And the thing that sticks out about them the most are the vocals. I'm not really sure if you heard the vocalist. I think his name is Colin, but he literally makes it seem like he's in pain when he is just
like, I actually have not heard this record. Is it like, I'm trying to think of like, a comparison. Is it like a Weakling album where the guy's like, ah, or like a Body, or like the Body album where, you know, the vocals are like, ah, ah, like something along those lines, or even different?
I think it's even different.
Oh, okay,
you legit have to like hear it.
Okay.
And it literally sounds like someone is, I won't even go as far to say it sounds like they're dying, but it sounds like they're on the verge of dying. It's not even like a full-on textbook harsh vocals. He's like mixing like a high screech with like a cry for help.
That actually sounds sick as hell.
And that's what really drew me to Amenra, because I definitely am like really drawn towards sad music, I have to say. Obviously post-metal. I'm really drawn towards sad, depressing shit.
That's so shocking. You're such an upbeat,
I know.
You're such a sunny, upbeat individual. I'm blown away.
Yeah, but you know what? I got to be in my feelings sometimes. And so this record is probably my favorite Amenra record. And not only because of the cry for help vocals and how much it like literally stabs you in your soul, it has a really beautiful way of not only communicating that sadness through the vocals, but also through the musicality. And there are songs that, honestly, they don't even like, I think vocals are even like quite scarce on the record on some songs. And so sometimes it's literally just an instrumental most of the song. And you're sitting there and you're like, why do I feel like I just need to go under the covers and never come out? It's just really ridiculous. And so this is a great record to have an emotional breakdown to. I'll say that.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right, let's hit them with one more recommendation. This is an album that also dropped in the 2010s, though earlier on in the decade. It's one of my favorite contributions to the genre that's more on the black metal side, because, you know, as you were saying earlier, there are some of those bands that are in post-metal or sort of post-metal adjacent, but they're more influenced by kind of more of a black metal style than they are sort of like predominantly another style or another genre. And yeah, this Marrow of the Spirit record, I just think is absolutely incredible. I mean, you know, usually black metal is known for how harsh it is and how brittle it is, and really just like how unforgiving it is in terms of its sound and in terms of just how relentless the drums are and how averse it can be key to really kind of like giving you anything like, truly like groovy or sweet to go off of. It's really going to challenge you, and put you in a dark place as well. But Marrow of the Spirit like borrows from a lot of those tremolo pick guitars and a lot of that blast beat drumming, and obviously the harsh lead vocals too. But embraces more cleanly production, more dramatic builds, more folk instrumentation too, here and there on certain tracks, and especially on the last song on the record as well. You're getting kind of like a crescendo point that is like very obviously pulled out of like the classic post-rock playbook. And I believe it's just like we were kind of talking about, just like 5 tracks or so spread across the length of an entire album. So, you do have a couple of like 10-minute plus songs on there that are really going to take you for a ride, and are very linear, but aren't necessarily, it's not necessarily a progressive rock thing. It's just like an epic kind of like gradual journey that you're being taken on that's very cinematic, and it's very dramatic, and it's more about the emotion being expressed than it is about sort of like any kind of like technical proficiency or flashiness that you might get on a more prog adjacent record, even that Kayo Dot record that I was talking about earlier. But yes, again, very dramatic, very powerful, and just completely black metal influenced from front to back. It's just like a lot of those core elements being, spread out across something that is just lengthier, linear, and more epic. Awesome. But yeah, I think those are going to be our 6 recommendations for all things post-metal and post-metal adjacent. Mm-hmm. Metal and Coffee, thank you very much for coming through with your picks and telling me why we need to hear them. Do you want to let everybody know where they can find you and check out more of your stuff?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Anthony. I'm Ebony of Metal and Coffee. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, thanks so much.
There you have it. Thank you very much for watching. Everyone have a good day, evening, morning, good night. And yes, that is going to be it for this video. Let me know if you have any sick post-metal recommendations down in the comments. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, post-metal forever.